Tonight, we are pulling up a red vinyl stool, slapping a laminated menu on the counter, and stepping into the one place Americans have been romanticizing ever since they stopped actually going there. The 1950s diner, not the glossy neon sign, jukebox playing, convertible parking version Hollywood keeps selling you. I mean the real thing. Sticky counters, mysterious pie, waitresses who called everyone on and meant none of it warmly, and a cup of coffee that could strip paint off a '57 Chevy. Congratulations. You have just woken up in 1953. You are sitting at a Formica counter somewhere in the American Midwest. The coffee in front of you is aggressively hot and aggressively bad. A ceiling fan is doing nothing useful, and someone behind the counter is about to call you on with the emotional energy of a toll booth operator. Welcome to the real 1950s diner. Try the pie or do not. Honestly, flip a coin. Long before the gleaming chrome palaces of the 1950s, the American diner started its life as something considerably less glamorous. A horse-drawn wagon parked outside a factory gate at midnight, selling sandwiches to workers who had no other options. These were called lunch wagons, and they were exactly as romantic as they sound. Cold, cramp, and faintly smelling of whatever had been in that pot. The longest in 1872, a man named Walter Scott in Providence, Rhode Island, loaded a wagon with sandwiches, boiled eggs, and pies and started selling them to factory workers and night shift newspapermen who had nowhere to eat after regular restaurants closed. It was not a romantic origin. It was a practical one. By the early 1900s, the wagons were being replaced by permanent structures, still narrow, still shaped like the wagons they descended from, but bolted to the ground and open for longer hours. They were called diners by this point, a reference to the dining car of a railroad train which had the same basic layout, long, narrow, a counter on one side, seats on the other. By the 1920s, companies in New Jersey and Connecticut were building diners in factories and shipping them on flatbed trucks. You could order a diner the way you ordered a house from a Sears catalog. Choose your model, place your order, wait for delivery, open for business. By the time the 1950s arrived, the diner had been through 50 years of iteration. What it had arrived at was a machine tuned to a specific purpose: fast food, hot coffee, low prices, and enough of a human presence behind the counter to make eating alone feel slightly less lonely. The stainless steel exteriors were not chosen because they were beautiful. They were chosen because they were durable, easy to clean, and communicated something important to anyone walking by. This place is hygienic. The chrome caught the light. The neon sign buzzed in colors that the 1950s considered festive, and the whole package said, "Come in. We are modern. We are not going to poison you." and the coffee is hot. The counter ran the length of the building, surfaced in formica that was wiped down so frequently it developed a particular kind of shine. The stools were chrome-legged, vinyl-seated, and attached to the floor in a way that allowed them to spin freely, which is why children have always loved diners and why their parents have always immediately regretted bringing them. The booths along the opposite wall were upholstered in vinyl that started out looking red and ended up looking a color that had no real name. Nothing in a diner was chosen for its charm. Everything was chosen for its durability, and the charm arrived later, unbidden, as a byproduct of time. Pick up a 1950s diner menu and you are holding a masterpiece of optimism. There are approximately 47 items, all of which cost less than $1. The meatloaf is listed with a confidence that defies scrutiny. American diner food of this era was not about flavor so much as volume and reliability. You knew what you were going to get. You got a lot of it, and nobody was going home hungry. Breakfast was the diner's strongest argument for its own existence, e.g. guests cooked to order, with toast and hash browns and a strip or two of bacon that arrived on the plate, with the unapologetic confidence of something that knew it was the best thing on the table. A cup of coffee was a nickel or a dime. A full breakfast was under 50 cents. The diner was genuinely accessible to people who were counting. If the diner had a soul, it lived in its waitresses. These were women who could carry 4 plates on one arm, remember your order without writing it down, refill your coffee without being asked, and still have enough composure left over to firmly redirect a rude customer with a single raised eyebrow. The job began before the doors opened. Side work. It was called the invisible labor that preceded the visible labor. Rolling silverware into napkins, filling salt and pepper shakers, restocking the sugar dispensers. In 1953, a dime tip on a 50-cent meal was considered acceptable. The women who worked these shifts often had children at home, or aging parents, or both. They smiled anyway, not always sincerely, but professionally, which in many ways is harder. The short order cook worked a flat top, grill the size of a conference table, managing 6 orders simultaneously, communicating entirely in a private shorthand that sounds like a foreign language to anyone outside the industry. Adam and Eve on a raft, wrecked. Scrambled eggs on toast. Burn one, take it through the garden and peeing a rose on it. A hamburger with lettuce, tomato, and onion. The grill had zones. Hotter toward the back, slightly cooler toward the front, and the cook moved things between them with a spatula in a constant unconscious choreography. The heat was constant and significant. The kitchen of a 1950s diner was never at any point during operating hours cool. Burns were common, and they were treated with the same practical minimalism as everything else. A quick rinse, maybe a rag wrapped around it, back to work. Diner slang was not invented for your amusement. though it is extremely amusing in retrospect. It was invented because short-order cooks and waitresses were moving too fast to say full sentences. Axle grease was butter. Blonde Wisand was coffee with cream and sugar. Nervous pudding was jello, which now that you hear it that way is honestly the most accurate description of jello ever committed to language. Two cackle fruit was two eggs. Wax was American cheese, presumably for its color and texture and the philosophical question of whether it qualified as actual food. An entire spoken grammar improvised over decades by people too busy to explain themselves. The coffee at a 1950s diner was not good. This is not a controversial statement. It was weak, over-extracted, kept hot on a burner for hours past the point of dignity, and served in a thick ceramic mug that retained heat the way a brick retains heat. And yet people drank it constantly, compulsively, reflexively. The diner waitress' most automatic gesture was the coffee refill, appearing at your elbow before your cup was empty, topping you off without ceremony. It was not about the coffee. It was about having somewhere to be, something warm in front of you, and someone who noticed you were there. The diner coffee was bad, and it was also, in its context, irreplaceable, not because of what it was, but because of what came with it. Every diner had them. The regulars, the man in the third stool from the left, who arrived at 6:45 every morning, and whose order was started before he sat down. The widow who came in on Wednesdays for the pot roast and stayed an hour past finishing it. The regulars were not merely customers. They were structural. A diner without regulars was just a building selling mediocre food. With them, it became a place. The regular's arrival was a social event calibrated precisely to appear like no event at all. You can eat eggs anywhere. You cannot be known anywhere. The diner was one of the places you could be known. More than one elderly regular in more than one 1950s diner was noticed missing by the counter before anyone else in their life had registered the absence. The jukebox in a 1950s diner was technically a music delivery machine, but functionally it was something closer to a permission slip. A nickel bought you 3 minutes in which whatever song you chose got to exist in the room. By the mid-50s, the jukebox selection skewed toward the new sounds that were making parents nervous. Early rock and roll, Surfman blues, the first tremors of a cultural earthquake that the diner comfortably sat right on top of, the Wurlitzer models of this era. Rounded top, colored light panels, visible mechanism were deliberately theatrical, built to draw the eye and justify the nickel before you had even heard a note. The 1950s diner was never as clean as the chrome suggested. The food was never as good as the menu promised. The coffee was terrible. The wages were low. The hours were long, and the pie was sometimes older than the jukebox. But it was real. It was a place where people who needed to eat could afford to do so, where a regular could walk in and be known, where a cook could turn out a perfect plate of eggs for someone who needed it. Hollywood gave us the neon and the nostalgia, but the real 1950s diner gave us something better. It gave us something better. It gave us a place that worked. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but reliably, and sometimes that is enough.